Revenge Films.
My name is Chelsea Williams. I live together with my husband, Jonathan, and our daughter, who is currently in 2nd grade. Ever since I was younger, I had always been pretty good at cooking. After I got married to my husband, I was also working as a food researcher, and at the same time, I was cooking for my family at home. My daily routine was to think about my family's health and make them delicious meals every day. I loved my job and my family, but recently there was one thing that had been bothering me. And that is that one day out of nowhere, my husband became cold towards my daughter and I, and seemed like he completely lost interest in our family. Back when my husband was still single, he had been working hard as a full-time employee at a company. However, as soon as we got married, he quit his job. But not only that, he refused to start looking for a new job, and he was always lazing around and relaxing at home. I found him a little bit unreliable as a husband, but at the same time, he was kind to me and our daughter. He also prioritized doing the chores around the house and helped out, so I decided to overlook that he wasn't working. However, about a few months ago, out of nowhere one day, his attitude towards me and my daughter completely changed. Even when he was home, he stopped talking to us and we barely had any conversations. By the time I realized it, he was leaving the house without saying a word to me all day. As soon as I noticed this change in my husband, the first thing that I suspected was that he was having an affair. However, I didn't have any evidence whatsoever, and I couldn't confront him without having any proof. So for a while, I felt like I had no choice but to keep an eye on it and see what happens. That is, until about 3 months after I noticed this change. As usual, my husband was still being cold towards his family and seemed to want nothing to do with us. That was when one day my daughter had a parent observation day at her elementary school, so I went to her school. As I was waiting for the class to start, one of the fellow moms, Melissa, suddenly came over to talk to me. Melissa had a pretty flashy appearance, and she was always bragging to those around her that her husband was rich and elite. My image of her was that she was far from domestic, and to be honest, I was a little bit averse to her. Because of that, I had barely even spoken to her before, and I had kept my distance from her. That's why I was surprised when she suddenly came over to talk to me, and then the first thing she said was, "Your husband is always taking such good care of me, Chelsea." And a smile came over her face. I was confused, and I asked her, "Oh, I didn't know that you and my husband knew each other." "Yes, we know each other very well. I mean, really, really, really well." And I couldn't really understand this weird way that she was speaking to me. It bothered me. It felt off, but for the moment I didn't want to continue the conversation, so I politely ended it and decided to distance myself from her. But then suddenly, before I could get away, she said, "Oh, Chelsea, would you happen to be free next Monday?" I didn't respond, so she continued, "There's something important I want to talk to you about, so please keep it open for me." And then she told me a time and a place to meet her. I had no idea what on earth she could possibly want to talk to me about, but I assumed there was no mistake that it had to do with my husband. And given the timing of everything, I had nothing but a bad feeling about it. The next Monday, on the day of our meeting, I went to the cafe at the time she told me to meet her, and Melissa was already sitting at the table waiting for me. I went over and said hello to her, and her response was, "Oh my, you got here pretty early," and she smiled at me. I sat down across from her and I ordered an iced coffee, and as soon as it arrived, Melissa said, "I'm gonna get right to it," and started the conversation. As I was waiting for the next words, she said, "Chelsea, I wanted to tell you that I'm dating your husband." I had somewhat of a bad feeling about all of this, but when she actually said it so clearly to me in reality, to my face, I couldn't hide that I was flustered. I couldn't find any words to say back to her, and I remained silent. But then Melissa continued, "You know, your husband said himself that he prefers a sexy woman like me over somebody as bland as you. That's why ever since he fell in love with me, he says that he doesn't care about you or his daughter anymore." And then she started laughing like she was making fun of me. I finally replied, "You really think it's okay for you to have that kind of relationship with a man that has a family and a household? And first of all, you also have a husband and you have a child as well. What about your family?" But then she said, "Oh, please, I've already made my decision, and I'm prepared to throw my husband and my child away. So can you also hurry up and get a divorce? I want to hurry up and get married to Jonathan. We're in love." She said that to me with a confident look on her face, but to be honest, my initial reaction was that I had no idea why she wanted to make my husband hers that badly. My only response was, "Please give me a little bit of time to think about everything." Melissa agreed and said that we should meet again at the same place at the same time in 1 week. I went home and my mind was going in circles about the divorce. And I started to think, what did I even like about my husband in the first place? Now that I think about it, my husband wasn't even trying to get a new job, and he was just a freeloader that was living off of my income that I was working hard for. And yet, the only reason why I continued my married life with him was because he always seemed thoughtful and caring of me and my daughter. However, when I think about my husband these days, not only was he not working, but he wasn't ever home either. On top of all that, not only was he completely uninterested in me or my daughter, he was having an affair with one of the other moms from the elementary school. And where would there be any reason for me not to get a divorce from a man like that? When I calmed down and I thought about everything logically, as a result, I immediately decided to get a divorce. 1 week later, I hadn't spoken to my husband yet about getting a divorce from him, but underneath the surface, I had already started preparing towards the divorce and taking the necessary steps. But that was easy for me because ever since the day that I had met Melissa at the cafe and she told me she was having an affair with my husband, he hadn't come home, not once. Even our daughter was confused. And if that was how he wanted to play this game, I decided there was no need for me to show him any mercy. On the next Monday, when I showed up at the cafe again, sitting there this time was not just Melissa, but also my husband. I wasn't expecting that my husband would also be there that day, but I wanted to talk to him about the divorce anyway, so it was good timing for me. I sat down in my seat across from them, and I could tell that my husband was trying to avoid eye contact with me. He seemed uncomfortable to be there. As the three of us sat there, the first person to open their mouth was Melissa, and she said, "So, are you ready now to get divorced?" And so I nodded, and I informed her that I had already started the necessary steps in order to get a divorce. When I let her know, Melissa was thrilled and said, "Oh, that's perfect, because we've already signed the contract for our new apartment, and we're going to move in together." And then she continued, "Because Jonathan and I are serious about each other. I don't even care about his $300,000 a year income. I just want to marry him because we're in love," she exclaimed to me. But then I was shocked, and without thinking, I blurted out, "His $300,000 income? But I'm the one that's earning $300,000 a year." When I said that, even though he had been silent this entire time, my husband yelled out and in a loud voice said,
"You idiot! Shut up!"
But at that moment, Melissa seemed confused and said, What does she mean by that?" And turned to Jonathan, he desperately said, and was clearly desperately trying to come up with any kind of excuse. And that was when I hit Melissa with the entire truth without hiding or sugarcoating anything. In reality, in my work as a food researcher, I had started posting on social media. That started to gather attention, and I had published multiple food research and cooking books. Amongst the other housewives, I had actually become a bit of a celebrity. Recently, I also started live streaming while I cook healthy, delicious meals for my family, and my income had drastically increased. And that's why, currently, my career had taken a turn and that I was earning $300,000 a year. And because of my success, my husband was being spoiled by me and sucking up to me. And that's why, for years, he had continued to be unemployed and wasn't even trying to find a job for himself. When Melissa heard all of this from me, she seemed shocked. Even though just a second ago she said that she didn't care about his annual income, she was furious and raised her voice. "Are you kidding me? Is that true? Does that mean you were fooling me?" Jonathan was panicking and apologizing profusely to her, but Melissa continued yelling and asked him, "Well, then how did you pay for the initial down payment on the apartment? What about all of the money for the furniture and the electronics and everything we ordered for the house?" But Jonathan went silent, so I started saying, "Let's see, you don't have any savings of your own, and I am managing all of our household finances, so wait a minute. Could it be that you took out a loan and are now in debt?" When I said that, Jonathan looked down and froze. He was shaking in his seat. Melissa continued yelling, "I can't believe this! What are we supposed to do? I've already divorced my husband, and he stole full custody of our child too, you know!" As she said that, she was in hysterics. After yelling at my husband, she then broke down into tears on the spot.
Don't worry. When we do a separation of assets in the divorce, I'm also going to get a lot of money out of that, so we can figure it out with that money.
I couldn't believe the stupidity coming out of my husband's mouth, and I was so over it. I didn't know how to respond, but I said, "We're getting a divorce because you were having an affair. Obviously, there's no way there's going to be a separation of assets. In fact, I'm going to be hiring a lawyer, and I will collect a settlement fee from the both of you, so I hope you're prepared for that." After I said that, I no longer had the energy to deal with them, so I stood up and left. Now that that was over, I made my husband sign the divorce papers and I kicked him out of the house. But he was showing up at the front door, banging on the door and begging.
Please, forgive me. Please just give me another chance, Chelsea.
He was yelling these things, but of course I ignored him. My ex-husband and Melissa were left with no choice but to live in the apartment that they had rented by taking out a loan. But Melissa was furious with my ex-husband, and I heard that they were getting into such big fights that the police were being called into the house frequently. In order to pay back the massive debt, apparently my ex-husband is being forced to work morning until night and physically labor his jobs. And he's being pushed to the edge, both physically and mentally. As for Melissa, not only did she lose her family, but she was also stuck living with a man who was now carrying a massive debt. And as if to rub salt into the wound, she was hit with a settlement fee from both me and her own ex-husband, and she had a mental breakdown. These days, she's going to a mental health hospital and getting treatment, while also working multiple part-time jobs in order to pay the settlement fees to both parties. On the other hand, as for me, now that my ex-husband was gone and I was living alone with my daughter, I had a lot less stress. Because of that, my motivation towards my work only continued to increase. My income became even more steady, and these days I'm able to enjoy going on vacations overseas with my daughter and my parents. Life was fun again. Even though I was shocked by my ex-husband's betrayal, after everything that he did to me, I had no regrets whatsoever. And thanks to that, my feelings towards the divorce were a lot more clear. Now that I was a single mother, I want to live proudly with my daughter so that she can have a happy life as well.
My name is Michael. This is a story about an incident from 1 year ago. But right around that time, I had just started college. I had never worked any kind of job, not even part-time before. So, in order to learn a little more about society, I decided to start a job. Little did I know that I was going to be roped into the most outrageous incident there. I ended up getting a part-time job at a convenience store, but there I had a senior colleague named Kevin. When I first started the job, he was placed in charge of training me. Generally, he was quiet and didn't say much, but when it came to the things he wanted to talk about, he would speak endlessly about himself. I did think that he was a pain, but because he was my senior colleague and we overlapped shifts together, I always just listened and nodded my head in agreement to his stories. Kevin often spoke to me about himself, especially about his girlfriend. Apparently, his girlfriend had long, straight black hair, and she was super beautiful. To be honest, I didn't have that much interest in listening to stories about somebody else's girlfriend, but there wasn't anything else to talk about, so I always pretended like I had some interest as I listened to him talk. One day, I had the day off of work, so I decided to go to a diner that was near my house. I was going to that diner every now and then, and I had also been using it whenever I would do my homework or I had reading to do. I sat down in the seat that I always used, and I opened up the menu. But then, when I got up to try and go use the restroom, I saw a familiar face. As I got closer, I realized that it was Kevin sitting there, and sitting in the seat across from him was a woman, so I assumed that that must be the girlfriend he was always talking about. In order to go to the restroom, I needed to pass by the table where they were sitting, and I didn't think it would be right to ignore him. Just as I was thinking that, we accidentally made eye contact, so I had no choice but to say something. However, that was when I noticed that something seemed strange. When I spoke to Kevin, and without thinking, I asked him if he was on a date with his girlfriend today. All of a sudden, the woman that was sitting across from him turned to me. With tears in her eyes, she said,
"No, that's not right. I am not his girlfriend at all."
She said that so suddenly and had turned to me with such intensity that I started to panic. Not only that, but then the woman started asking me to help her. I didn't know what was going on, and my mind was running in circles and confusion. But then, in the seat directly next to them, there was a guy that clearly looked like a gangster. That man turned to me and glared, and he said that this was none of my business and that I better hurry up and get lost. But when I looked over at the woman, she was pleading towards me and begging me not to go, shaking her eyes and crying. I didn't know what to do, so I decided I would go to the bathroom for a moment and calm down and try to think about it. When I sat down, I was able to organize my thoughts. I didn't know what the woman was saying to me, but I felt there was no mistake that there was some kind of trouble and things were not looking good. While I was in the bathroom, I decided to contact the police. And then, when I walked out of the bathroom and passed by Kevin's seat once again, the woman was still looking over at me, her eyes begging for help. I figured that the police should be arriving soon, and in order to buy some time, I decided to muster up the courage and ask what on earth they were talking about. That was when the gangster-looking guy cut in, and he said that the two of them were in debt, and they were in the middle of discussing how they were going to pay back that debt. But then the woman started pleading towards me again. "That's not true! I don't know anything about this!" I still didn't know what on earth was going on, and Kevin was simply sitting there without saying a word. I was wondering if there was some financial difficulty, but the woman's face seemed so desperate, and I couldn't feel like her crying face was a lie. I was trying to figure out what to do when the police finally arrived. The police then asked if I was the one that called them, and I nodded yes. The first thing they did was to kick the gangster-looking guy out of the diner. The gangster-looking guy and his group kept shouting that they didn't do anything and they were throwing a tantrum. But of course the police had the upper hand in the situation. For the time being, Kevin and the gangster-looking man were taken away by the police. I was then left alone in the diner with the woman, so I decided to sit down with her and ask her the details of what had happened. Since she didn't know my name or who I was, I started with the self-introduction. I told her that I was working part-time at the same place as Kevin, and I told her my name. And then the woman introduced herself and said her name was Michelle. She told me about the sequence of events that led to this situation, and I was beyond shocked by what I heard. I had assumed that Michelle was dating Kevin since she looked exactly like the girl he had described to me as his girlfriend. But not only were they not dating, she said that they had never even spoken to each other before. So when I asked her why they were sitting together at the diner, Michelle said that she was walking down the street that day when suddenly, out of nowhere, Kevin came over and spoke to her. Apparently, Kevin said that he needed to talk to her about her debt. In reality, Michelle had grown up in a single-mother household and they were quite poor. She knew that her mother had gone into debt just so that Michelle would be able to go to college, and she figured that maybe it was a debt collector about that particular loan. And so she decided to follow Kevin into the diner and listen. However, when she actually got into the diner, she noticed that there were other men around that looked like gangsters. And then, out of nowhere, Kevin said to her that she needed to start working a shady job at night for his sake. And then he started crying and begging her. Just as she had started panicking about the situation, apparently that was when I walked by. The story was so outrageous that I had a hard time believing it. But when I looked at Michelle as she was telling me the story, she was insistent that this was the truth. For the time being, instead of only taking Michelle's side of the story, I decided I needed to speak to Kevin as well. The next day, I knew that I was scheduled for a shift with him at my part-time job. Michelle said that not only were they not dating, but she didn't even know Kevin. So I asked him what was going on. But that was when I found out just how truly crazy and dangerous Kevin was. When I was telling him that Michelle said she had never spoken to him before, Kevin said to me with a dead straight face, "We don't have to speak because our hearts are already connected." When he said that, I was shocked. But then, when I asked him on top of that whether they'd ever gone on any dates together, his response was, "Yeah, of course we have. We're always walking home together." When he said that, I was starting to become even more confused and couldn't wrap my head around the situation. So then I asked him, if they're walking home together, then they must be holding hands or talking to each other, right? But Kevin said, "We haven't held hands together, not yet. That's because we're walking with a little bit of distance in between us. But distance doesn't mean anything to the two of us because we're connected." When he said that, I started to have a bad feeling. So when I asked him how much distance was between them when they were walking home together, he said it was about 50 meters. I felt a chill down my spine. To my disbelief, Kevin wasn't Michelle's boyfriend or anything like that. He was simply a stalker. And in his mind, he had to come up with an entire imaginary situation. And when it came to the incident about the debt, he thought that he was already dating Michelle. And if he could get rid of his debt, the two of them would be able to be happy. So that's why he asked her to start working a shady job at night in order for them to live happily together debt-free. This time, when I tried explaining to him that that money had nothing to do with Michelle, Kevin was saying that because they were dating, it was given that she should help him pay it back. And at this point, I couldn't understand what Kevin was thinking at all. I started to feel like this was way too crazy, and I thought about telling the police about it, but if I didn't have any evidence, the police wouldn't do anything. On the day of the diner incident, I had exchanged contact information with Michelle. So I decided to tell her that I spoke to Kevin and what he told me. She was terrified. She asked me to go with her anytime she needed to go somewhere, so I decided to do that for now. Michelle was also suffering a lot of mental damage, and she said that the gangster-type guy was also following her around and she was reaching the edge. I figured if I would be able to alleviate at least some of that uneasiness, then I should try to help her. Then one day, when Michelle and I were walking, Kevin suddenly appeared in front of us, and then, glaring at me, he said, "What the hell do you think you're doing, laying hands on my woman?" And as he said that, he pulled out a wrapped-up towel from inside of his jacket. As he unwrapped it, he drew a knife. Michelle screamed and she ran directly behind me. Pastor Bray also started screaming and the whole area turned into a panic. I tried to tell Kevin to calm down, but none of the words I was saying were reaching him at all. He just kept muttering to give him back his woman. I wanted Michelle to at least get away, and so even though she was stuck behind my back, I told her to just run. With tears streaming down her face, she ran off somewhere. I was then left to face Kevin alone, but since he was holding a knife, I was beyond terrified on the inside. Kevin started coming closer to me and said, "You got some nerve going near my woman!" He was still muttering these things, and he started swinging the knife. I was holding Michelle's bag, so I was able to defend myself from the first swing, but he kept going through the bag and stabbing, and my arms were covered in injuries. I didn't have any weapon whatsoever, and since the attack was completely one-sided, I lost my balance. Just when I thought it was over for me, Kevin was stopped by the police and taken down. For a moment, I didn't know what had happened, and I couldn't understand the situation. But it turned out that as soon as Michelle had run away, she immediately called the police. Of course, Kevin was arrested on the spot as he was caught in the act. After what had happened previously, Kevin was declared guilty of intent to murder. It was decided that he would be kept behind bars for a while. Until the very end, Kevin kept insisting, "That guy stole my woman! That's why I was going to kill him!" But thankfully, Michelle denied all of that to the police, and thanks to that, I was completely cleared. If anything, he was also guilty of stalking her, and the police said he wasn't going to be able to come out from behind bars for a while. After everything had finished, I wasn't exactly her knight in shining armor, but she told me she had feelings for me, and we began dating. I never could have imagined in my wildest dreams that the part-time job that I got just to learn a little bit of society would get me roped into an incident like this. But honestly, it felt like something straight out of a TV series, and I still don't feel like I actually lived through that experience. But I hope I never have to see him ever again.
I'm Kay, and I've been married to Justin for over 10 years. We have a son who goes to middle school. Recently, Justin was assigned a position in another state, and I was to stay at home with my son for 3 months. It made me a little worried because of a woman in the neighborhood who often recruits me into a religious group. When I was finishing my shift at the supermarket where I worked, somebody called my name from behind.
Hi, Kay. Oh, I'm glad to see you here. I have an important thing to tell you.
I was just about to get on my bike. It was Tanya, who is known for persistently recruiting people. I'm not close to her, and I tried to distance myself from her, but our sons go to the same school. What is it? I have to go home and make dinner for my son.
It's only 5 p.m. You should take a break, too.
She stood in my way as if she were blocking my bike. It seemed hard to force my way through. Okay, I have 5 minutes. What is it now?
Are you happy now?
When I was about to say something, she held out her arms in front of me to stop me.
Wait, you don't have to tell me. I know. Not like our guru, but I can read people's minds, too.
Then she closed her eyes as if she were praying or something.
I know. You have worries. Because your husband is away from home. Am I right?
Anyone could say that if our sons are friends and talk to each other. I thought she was joking, but she was serious. I wanted to say give me a break. She seemed worse than the rumors. I said I had to go and was going to go home.
I'm not finished.
She said it loudly in front of my workplace. It was getting to a busy time in the store, and I noticed their eyes on me. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but I felt awkward. She had a self-satisfied smirk on her face.
I don't want to give them the wrong idea, especially at your work. How about we grab a coffee somewhere, Kay?
Every word that came out of her mouth sounded unnatural, and she says my name loudly to give them the impression that we know each other. I have nothing to talk about.
Yes, you do. Please, open your mind. Let's search for happiness together.
I'm not going to fall for that.
Oh, why?
Because I took religious studies at college. I know what you're doing. I wanted to run away, but I was also afraid of retaliation. I thought I should decline politely, and we went to a coffee shop. She lives nearby, and our sons are classmates. We have mutual friends. To prevent further disturbance, I should say no clearly, once and for all. We ordered coffee, and she started.
I heard your husband is away. Is it true?
Yes, so?
I got a message from God. That's why I came to talk to you. I'm sorry to tell you, but your husband is having an affair, or he's going to soon.
Causing anxiety to innocent people is their usual tactic. I guess your God has a lot of free time to send you here to tell me about my husband's affair, I replied with dry humor. I was offended because I felt Justin was insulted. Justin is trustworthy. His job is very demanding, and he comes home every weekend. There's no time for him. When our coffee was served, she talked about coffee calmly. If they're unfamiliar with the clever tactics of religious groups, they may give in at this point. She talks in such a friendly way and calmly. She's not aggressive. When we had almost finished our coffee, she came back to the subject.
Your husband is taking advantage of the living situation and having an affair.
He is not.
I understand how you feel, but this is a message from God. In other words, it's the truth. Of course, your husband won't admit it. If you try to get proof, it'll be of no use. The divine message says even if you hire an investigator, you'll be in no luck, because he's hiding it well.
I understood why she approached me after Justin went away for work. She's good at exploiting people's weaknesses. Even though this may be a cookie-cutter tactic, I felt resentful, so I asked her a question. What is the foundation of your religious group? Is it Buddhism or Christianity?
Neither. Our guru created an entirely new religion.
And then she went on and on. They all sounded familiar from the major religions in the world. It seemed like a patchwork religion. She said dramatically,
"Adultery is a sin. Not only your husband, but if you ignore it, you'll be a sinner too. At the time of the final judgment, you don't want to be cast into the hell of Jahannam by King Enma, do you?"
It was a terrible sentence that seemed to be randomly copied and pasted together. Final Judgment is from Christianity and King Enma is from Buddhism, and Jahannam means hell in Islamic belief. Am I wrong?
Our guru is generous and takes in existing beliefs as well.
Doesn't that contradict what you said earlier about entirely new religion? This stopped her rubbish. That was easy. Then I went on to give her a brief lecture about the basics of Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam. She didn't seem to follow me, though, probably from a lack of basic study. I paid for my coffee and left her there, who couldn't say anything more. A few days later, I thought she gave up on me, but she didn't. I was cleaning the front yard. She said abruptly,
"I know you're in trouble with something."
"I am in trouble most with persistent religious solicitation." She pretended not to hear me. Her eyes seemed to emit a strange light.
"I wanted to tell you about this seminar. It's very valuable. I know I was defeated by you the other day because of my lack of studying, but there will be virtuous people there. I'd like you to come."
Yeah, and when I get there, I'll be surrounded by big guys and forced to buy an expensive vase or water, right? No, thank you. Now she changed her tone and whispered in my ear.
You should know that it's an honor to be invited to the seminar when you're new. Normally, people of high rank don't meet with commoners like us, but I recommended you to them, and they allowed you to join them."
The way she talked made me nauseous. It's okay, really.
Okay means you'll come?
No, don't you understand English?
Why don't you come with me to see if I understand English?
Is there a medicine to put on this woman?
You're in denial. You say no to everything, so negative. That's why your husband found someone nicer.
I couldn't stand it anymore. I yelled at her. My husband isn't having an affair. I don't care about your seminar a bit. I have no interest in listening to a stranger's stories. I'll ask my husband directly. She seemed put off by my harsh tone, finally. I left her there and went inside the house. That day I texted Justin. That religious woman makes me crazy. Justin usually comes home on Saturday, but it was Friday, and he flew home at night for me. I asked him if I could see his phone to see if he was having an affair, and he handed me his phone on the spot. There was nothing suspicious, of course.
Or you can call my boss and ask him if I have any free time to fool around.
I apologized to him. I'm sorry, she kept saying that you were having an affair, so that made me a little crazy. Justin comforted me with his words. After that, I decided to ignore her no matter what. She seemed to move on to someone else, but with little success. She was trying to implant worrisome information into people's heads, which was a lie, of course. She forced an unfortunate old man into buying an expensive vase from her, but after that, the man called the police and sued her for fraud. She was divorced by her husband and lost custody of her child. She was also shut out of the group because she defamed them by causing a police matter. She must be devastated. She kept asking people around, "Are you happy now?" but ended up being the least happy person of all. My name is Sheila. I live together with my husband, Mark, and our son, who is in elementary school. My parents' house is an old house with a wide garden and a storehouse with thick mortar walls. My parents passed away last year, and the three of us are currently living in my parents' house. There are many traditional tools inside the storehouse. To make sure they stay safe inside, I put a lock on it. My family has a good relationship with each other, so I have no complaints when it comes to my private life. However, when it came to my mom friend, who is also our neighbor, I have concerns and complaints about her. She's the central figure in the moms group, and she's also the PTA president who has strong opinions and a loud voice. Also, she has a brazen personality. She comes to our house and keeps on borrowing stuff. Our storehouse is huge, and my husband is the kind of person who values seasonal events. Because of that, different tools and equipment, such as tools for pounding mochi and equipment for some noodle flumes and even camping gear, were stored inside the storehouse. One summer day, that mom friend came to our house. "Hi, can I borrow camping gear and barbecue equipment? We'll have a camping trip with the other mothers. I want the kids to cultivate aesthetic sensibility by exposing them to nature." Honestly, I didn't want to lend her anything because we're really not that close. Aside from that, I've heard bad rumors about her. But she is my neighbor, and not only that, she's also the PTA president of the school where my son goes to, so it's difficult to say no to her. But looking annoyed by my reluctance, she exclaimed, "As long as you live here in this area, you are obligated to lend your tools and equipment for the children who live here." Obliged to lend my things? But the camping gear and barbecue equipment are my private property. I thought that if I argued with her, I might ruffle her feathers, so I ended up lending her the tools. She returned them after summer, just before the leaves started changing color. Summer vacation is over. Our family wasn't able to go camping or have a barbecue during summer this year. Helga kept making excuses like, "I'm busy," and "It's too bulky, so maybe next time." She didn't return them right away. However, when she finally did return the camping gear and barbecue set, I was shocked because they were very dirty and battered. Of course, when I lent them, they were clean. They were not dirty and battered like what's in front of me. The tent got the worst treatment. There were scorch marks all over. She probably cooked a barbecue right next to the tent. There were even ashes from cigarettes on the floor of the tent, and there were small holes that weren't there before. She probably smoked cigarettes inside the tent and dropped the cigarette ashes on the floor. Of course, I was enraged and I stomped my feet and complained. "You not only returned them very late, they're dirty and battered. I lent them to you in mint condition. What is this? Especially the tent. It's beyond repair." "Oh, that? It was a severe nuisance to us, too. You lent us a tattered tent. We were very embarrassed, you know." "Huh? They were all broken when you lent them to me." "There's no way." "Where's your evidence? You don't have it, right? I'm telling you that those were broken from the start. Don't blame me when you don't even have evidence." That's when our feud was decisive. Of course, when she came again to borrow something, I didn't lend her a single thing. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months until autumn turned into winter. But something happened during that time. A thief broke inside our storehouse. The lock was destroyed and our tools to make mochi were stolen. Those tools were antiques, made by carving a large wood. The other tool wasn't as high value as the other, but it is also of a high value. Who in the world did this? It's an ancestral inheritance, and it's a memento. I went to the police station to report the theft and damage, but the culprit wasn't found. Then, as if in mockery, the mochi-making tools were returned. However, they were broken in half and battered. The tools were also dirty with cigarette ashes. All that evidence pointed to Helga, who borrowed my tent and did something similar. With her as my number one suspect, I asked around if they knew anything. After asking enough people around, I learned that there was a mochi-making contest at the end of the year, held by the PTA president. This is a rare tool used to make mochi, so even though I only took a picture of it and showed it to everyone, I gathered information quickly. When I went to the elementary school where both our kids go to, I was told that "We were told that those mochi-making tools belonged to the PTA president. We can also confirm that she broke those tools. There are witnesses as to her using that as an ashtray after it was broken." That's what the lady explained to me. In other words, Helga stole my mochi-making tools. Then she opened a mochi-making contest and she broke those tools. I went home and took out some old pictures. Then I went back to school and explained in detail. Actually, this tool is a venerable tool handed down from the 19th century. As for the other tool, it was made after the Second World War. So I believe there is historical value for these tools. At my insistence, an emergency PTA meeting was held the next day. Of course, the agenda was about the stolen mochi-making tool, which was used at the PTA mochi-making contest headed by the PTA president. Helga, who was the PTA president, acted like she didn't know anything. Those mochi-making tools belong to me, and during the contest, they were battered and got broken, so I threw them away. I don't have them with me anymore. What guts to say such a lie in front of everyone? I then showed the picture that the contest participants took that day. As you can see, my mochi-making tools are in this picture. She then responded with defiance. It's so ancient. It's not my fault it's broken. I heard that you tipped it over and then kicked it as you went. The right way to carry that tool is to carry it at an angle so that only the bottom is touching the ground and then you roll it. I don't know and I don't care. Also, why did you beat the edges of that tool? Well, that's because I'm not used to making mochi. So how about the fact that you used it as an ashtray? It was already garbage by that time, so I just used it as garbage should be used. She doesn't seem like she learned her lesson at all. According to what I heard from the participants of the mochi-making contest, she kicked the tool from above the stairs and it rolled down. Maybe it's because the contest was over that she won't use it anymore, but they saw her laugh at what happened. I made use of that very old tool that was not much of use anyway, in a huge event where many participated, so you should at least thank me for that. It was going nowhere, so the PTA meeting was adjourned. Of course, I explained what happened to the police. I've already filed an age report, so I decided to make her pay for the damage. I bet the PTA president underestimates me and only thinks of this lightly. Mochi-making tools can be bought online for a few $100 on the cheaper side, and most of them lose their value as they become old. Even houses and cars are the same in most cases. She probably thinks that she only has to pay $200 to $300 for reparations. However, when the principal went to get it appraised at the History Museum, the results were shocking.
This is wonderful news! It not only has historical value, it's also preserved well. It is a very precious piece.
Helga went pale, because the tools she broke were far more expensive than she thought.
We would like to buy both tools for $15,000. Would you be okay with that? We would like to display this in the History Museum.
So I asked, doesn't that mean that these tools have a value of $15,000?
No, that is not the initial value.
The History Museum curator then told me the real value of the tools. Right after that, a ridiculous amount of bills was fixed.
Properly speaking, the actual value is around $60,000.
Based on the appraisal results, the reparation amount was decided as $60,000, but the curator continued ruefully.
However, these tools are broken. Because of that, the value has fallen. The initial value of this tool is $60,000.
So I smiled and said to Helga, "So, please pay $60,000 as reparations." I already filed a damage report and this is a crime, so there's no use in complaining. But, well, I did steal it, but the other participants were also encouraging me and having fun. She and the other participants started balking at each other. She probably tried to make the money she had to pay as little as possible. But I made that rotten woman pay $60,000 together with her minions. Helga had to pay $50,000 from that amount, and she was stripped of her position as the PTA president. As if that wasn't enough, her husband divorced her because of the embarrassment she caused him. I heard that she moved somewhere by herself. Karma finally got to her after all the things she did to me. The next day, my family and I went to see the mochi-making tools that were displayed at the History Museum. I realized that it's not bad to see this heirloom with national historical value at the museum where everyone can see and appreciate its value, instead of being kept in the storeroom, accumulating dust and away from the spotlight. Thank you so much for watching. What did you think of this video? If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you in the next video. My name is Jessica Smith. It's been about 2 years since I graduated from college, and I was able to get a job at the company that I had always dreamed of. I'm a hardworking 24-year-old. Ever since I graduated from college, I had been seeing my friends from school pretty regularly. And whenever we see each other, we would update each other on what had been going on in both our work and private lives. One day, as usual, I had gathered on the weekend with 6 of my friends from college. We were having a small party together at a pub when suddenly one of my friends had started talking and she seemed a little bit uncomfortable. Actually, I wanted to tell you guys, but apparently Karen's getting married, and she told me that she's going to have an engagement party, so she asked me to talk to all of you and invite you all to it. But the moment we heard that, everybody that was there went quiet and had an uncomfortable look on their face. But that was understandable because Karen was the person that was the most disliked out of all of the girls in college. The reason for that was because regardless of who she was speaking to, she always wanted to belittle them and put herself above them. Because Karen was beautiful upon first glance and she had a great body and good style, anybody would think that she would be popular. However, her personality was so bad that even the most clueless of guys didn't like her. And regardless of guys or girls, everybody in the college disliked her and avoided her. Especially all of the girls had an aversion to her. But unfortunately, I had known Karen since we were in middle school and we had that rotten connection, so I wasn't exactly able to cut off my ties with her. As they say, birds of a feather flock together, and a lot of the friends that I had were also people-pleasers like me. Most of these girls weren't able to ignore Karen or be mean to her, and by the time we had realized it, Karen had started infiltrating our group and hanging out with us because nobody was able to say no to her. Ever since we were little, Karen would brag to everybody around her and say, "My daddy is the CEO of a company, and our family is super rich." And she was always wearing and carrying luxury brand goods. Everybody was fooled by this, but because I was her classmate from middle school, I knew that that was all a lie. In reality, Karen's father was just a regular employee at a small-town factory in our hometown, and I knew that her family was always struggling to raise their 5 children. Karen was the oldest, and she had 4 younger brothers, and as long as I've known her, both of her parents were working full-time. For that reason, they weren't able to pay for all of her college school expenses. And even though that's what she was saying at school, she was actually working part-time at an escort lounge. That's how she was earning her money for school and for her social life. I knew that Karen had this hard-working side to her as well, and that's why I wasn't able to hate her from the bottom of my heart. That's why when we ended up at the same college together, I wanted to at least be friendly to her on the surface, and yet, despite my efforts, without knowing it, I was greatly betrayed by Karen. In the end, I wasn't able to say no, and I found myself accepting the invitation to her engagement party. I wasn't looking forward to it, and I dragged my feet to the venue that was on the invitation. When I arrived there was a huge party room, and Karen and her fiancé's names were written everywhere. But the moment that I saw the name of her fiancé, my jaw dropped to the floor. That's because Karen's fiancé was none other than my long childhood friend, Michael. Because Michael and I grew up in the same neighborhood and our houses were close to each other, we had known each other since we were little. However, when Michael's parents got a divorce, he moved out of our hometown with his mother. That was when we were in elementary school, and I hadn't seen him since then. Michael was always wearing short sleeves and shorts and running around outside, and he didn't even care about the snot coming out of his nose. He always had fun when we played together. I was curious as to how the two of them began their relationship, and I found myself getting excited about this party, and I wanted it to start. I walked into the venue, and as soon as the party began, Michael and Karen made their grand entrance in a dress and a suit. I hadn't seen Michael in years, and he seemed like a completely different person. He had become a handsome adult, and I was surprised. His face was completely different from when we were little kids, but when I saw the birthmark under his right eye, I knew instantly that it was him. It seems that Michael hadn't recognized me at all, so when he came over to greet our table, he said, "Nice to meet you" to me. In reality, I wanted to tell him that it was me and that we were childhood friends from years ago, but I figured that it would be best for everybody if I pretended like I didn't know him, so I ended up staying quiet and didn't say anything. I played along and I asked the two of them how they met, and in the way that she was used to, with an arrogant look on her face, Karen said, "We met at a dating event that's exclusive for the rich, and we just hit it off straight away. Michael met a lot of the standards. He's perfect for the daughter of a CEO like me." And as usual, she looked confident as she looked down upon all of us. But then Michael awkwardly said,
You see, my family is rich, so I wasn't really able to find a girl that could match. So I'm glad I found someone as worthy as Karen.
He said that, but I was confused. After Michael moved out of our hometown, there were widespread rumors in our school that he and his mom had moved into a tiny, rundown apartment. That's why I didn't understand what he meant when he said that his family was rich. I thought it was strange, but I continued to listen to what they had to say, and then he said the most ridiculous thing.
My family have also been CEOs from generation to generation, so I just couldn't get along with any normal peasants. Ever since I was a little kid, I've never once had to struggle, and I grew up in a wealthy household. That must be why I got along so well with Karen and hit it off with her.
The moment Michael said that lie, I couldn't help but to react, and the words fell out of my mouth. What? You're joking, right? But then Karen snapped at me. What do you mean, joking? Why would a plain little peasant like you know anything about Michael? She was furious, and that became the catalyst for Karen and Michael to start looking down upon everybody. And then Karen started saying, wait a minute, Jessica, are you jealous right now? Just because you're so plain and ugly, because of that you can't get a boyfriend, and you're jealous of me, aren't you? And she started laughing at me. And he started also belittling everybody and laughing. I couldn't believe the words coming out of their mouths. Of course I was angry, but I thought it was stupid for me to stoop down to their level, so I decided to hold it in. I looked around and my friends were doing the same as me. They didn't say anything and they were also holding in their anger. But because nobody was saying anything back to them, Karen and Michael only continued to escalate in their belittling of everybody. You know, I've always thought this since we were in college, but all of you are nothing more than people I kept around me to make me look better, you know? Honestly, it was so embarrassing for me to be around you, but I felt sorry for you, and that's why I decided to act like your friend. Yet you all decided to show up at this engagement party together looking like that. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. When Karen said that, it seemed like one of my friends had had enough. She stood up and said out loud, "You're the one that asked me to invite everybody and begged us to come, aren't you, Karen?" Finally, somebody stood up to her, but then Karen continued with confidence. "Don't you know the words, being polite? Don't you understand? I felt sorry and I invited you all. Not only are you poor, on top of that, you're also stupid. You don't have anything good going for you." And she laughed. Michael also started laughing with her, and then he asked all of us,
By the way, what do you all do for work anyway? Wait a minute, don't tell me that you work as an escort or something like that. I mean, seriously, there's no way I could ever be around a girl that works as an escort. Any woman that can only beg men for anything is an idiot.
That was when I could no longer take it, and I began my retaliation. Michael, you say that you can't be around a girl that works as an escort, but then why did you get engaged to Karen? If I remember correctly, back when we were in college, Karen, you were bragging that you were the top-selling escort, weren't you? When I said that, Karen's face shriveled.
What? Karen working as an escort? Obviously, there's no way that's true. Karen is the daughter of a CEO and her family is wealthy.
When Michael said that, I clarified for him. Karen's father is a hardworking and wonderful man that works at the local factory. He's not a CEO, though, is he? I mean, the CEO of that company is my uncle anyway. When I exposed the truth, Michael went into a panic.
Is that the truth? Karen! Does that mean that you've been fooling me?
He was going into hysterics. Karen was also panicking and trying to come up with any excuse, but without paying any mind to her, I continued. Michael, but you're also the one that's been fooling her, aren't you? As I said that, I informed him that I was his childhood friend. When he remembered who I was, he started yelling.
You better keep your mouth shut and not say anything unnecessary.
But then Karen turned to me and said, What? What would be unnecessary? Just say it. So I decided to inform her about Michael's upbringing, and I said, But also, your face changed, didn't it? Did you get plastic surgery or something? When I said that to him, his face shriveled as well.
Well, that's,
It was obvious that I hit the nail on the head, and as the final blow, I said, So, the daughter of a factory worker and a son with plastic surgery. What are you complaining about? And neither of them were able to say anything back to me. Now that they both knew about each other's lies, the two of them got into a huge fight on the spot, and we took that opportunity to quietly leave the venue. After that, at the end of their huge fight, their engagement was destroyed, and they fell apart. As it turns out, they had both lied to each other that their parents were currently overseas, and that's why neither of them had met each other's family. When Karen broke up with Michael, she started telling us to set up a group date for her, but there was nobody that wanted anything to do with her anymore. Apparently, Karen didn't have any friends other than us, and with the next man that she got engaged to, he found out right before the wedding that she didn't have a single friend that wanted to come to her wedding, and their wedding was canceled. After that, the same situation repeated, and all of us ended up getting married before Karen could. As for Michael, even after he broke up with Karen, he used the same lies to marry another woman. 2 years later, he was arrested for marriage scams. And after his true nature was exposed online, even after he was released from prison, he had to live the rest of his life in shame. As for me, at 26 years old, I got married to a man that I met at work. Right now, I'm living a very happy married life. I still see my friends from college regularly, but of course, all of us have been estranged from Karen since then. And from now on, I only want to value the friends that I actually get along with. My name is Jessica. I live together with my husband, Michael, and our son. One day, unfortunately, his family home that was nearby where his parents were living caught on fire. I heard that my father-in-law had inhaled a large amount of smoke, and even though he was rescued and taken in an ambulance, unfortunately, he passed away at the hospital. When my husband and I heard this, we immediately rushed to his family house. But by the time we got there, the house was already covered in flames. There were multiple firemen and fire trucks there desperately trying to calm down the fire at the house. We were all stunned by the shocking set in front of us. In the midst of that, my husband rushed over to the firemen and asked what the cause of the fire was. As it turns out, they said that his mother was making fried food in the kitchen, but the oil had caught on fire, and it turned into a giant house fire that engulfed the house. In that case, that should mean that my mother-in-law should be around near the house. But to our shock, my mother-in-law crept back to the house, and both my husband and I were shocked to see that she wasn't there. So my husband confronted his mother and asked her where on earth she had gone, even though she had left oil on fire in the kitchen. His mother was shaking, trying to come up with the words, but unable to form any sentences. After that, the police also arrived to the scene, and they questioned my mother-in-law. As it turns out, in the middle of making the fried food, my mother-in-law had received a phone call from one of her friends. They had told her that they went on a vacation and had bought souvenirs for her and asked if she wanted to come over and get them. And without thinking, she quickly sprinted out of the house to her friend's house that was just a few doors down on the street. At that time, she had forgotten to turn off the fire for the oil. That became the reason that the oil caught on fire, and it was the cause of the house fire. When she found out that her husband had passed away because of the fire, she started crying and screaming out for her husband. But the truth was that she had always had the habit of forgetting to turn off the fire on the stove, and my father-in-law had warned her multiple times. I had seen it for myself, and every single time, she would turn the anger onto him and say that she never caused a fire because of it. And she had always refused to listen to his warnings, but none of us could have imagined that the karma was instead going to turn around and fall upon my father-in-law. A couple hours after that, the house fire was somehow able to be taken out. However, both myself and my husband were in complete shock that his father was now gone. In the midst of all the chaos, my husband was yelling at his mother that she had been warned about this multiple times, and in response, my mother-in-law was crying and screaming that she never imagined things were going to turn out like this. With this scene in front of me, I was also having a hard time wrapping my head around the situation. Ever since the beginning of my relationship with Michael, my father-in-law had always been good to me. Even though his mother had always been against the marriage, he always defended me from her. He was kind enough to say that my husband and I were a good match for each other. And even for our son, every year for his birthday and on Christmas, he would prepare a sweet present, and he was a great grandpa as well. That's why, to be honest, I couldn't help but wonder why it had to be my father-in-law that got taken away so soon in this fire. According to what we heard, recently my father-in-law's health wasn't great. On that day, he was also lying down, and because he was taking medicine in order to be able to rest, he was in a deep sleep when everything happened. That must be why he woke up too late to notice the fire and to be able to get out in time. When I thought that he could have been saved, if only he had been rescued out of the fire a little bit sooner, I couldn't help but be overwhelmed with regret. But that regret was in vain, and shortly after that, my father-in-law's funeral was held. However, that was when the most unthinkable conversation was thrown towards me. To my disbelief, my mother-in-law said that now that she had lost her home, that we had to let her come and live with us.
Well, isn't this perfect? You recently built this house and it's got plenty of space, so it's fine, isn't it? Of course, you better make sure that my room is the one that gets the best sunlight. And also, it's going to be too difficult for me to move all of my belongings by myself, so you should prepare the moving company for me. Do you understand?
She came over out of nowhere and started making all these demands to us. But of course, there was no way that we were going to do all of that, especially not after everything that had happened. That's because my mother-in-law had done so many things to me that couldn't be described as just harassment. It was beyond that. I remember one time she tried to pretend like it was an accident, but when I was in the kitchen with her, she threw an entire pot of boiling hot oil that she had used to make fried food on my leg. It was a horrible burn, to the point where I had to be carried to the hospital in an ambulance. Thanks to that, my leg suffered a severe burn and the skin was completely burned off. To this day, I have a painful and unsightly large scar on my leg. On another day, she made me come over to their family house. My mother-in-law told me that I needed to take care of the weeds in their backyard, so I was out in the yard tending to the lawn, when suddenly out of nowhere, my mother-in-law said she needed to go somewhere and she got in the car. I thought she was going to head out, but then she tried to act dumb as she reversed the car directly towards me and tried to run me over. Every single time she would do these things to me, my husband would be furious with her, and he would confront and yell at his mother. It had gotten to the point where he said I didn't need to go over to their house anymore. That's why when she brought up this conversation about living with us, I felt chills down my spine. If she were to move in and I had to live with her, and she was going to start having these kinds of accidents all the time, there's no way I would be safe. If my father-in-law was still alive, then I may have thought about it just for a second, but now that my father-in-law had already passed away, there wasn't a single thing that I wanted to do for my mother-in-law. So without thinking, I instantly rejected her request and said it was impossible. Of course, my mother-in-law was furious at that.
What is wrong with this daughter-in-law? Even though your mother-in-law is having a hard time, you won't even let her live with you? Oh, this is unbelievable. I don't need a daughter-in-law like this. You need to get a divorce immediately.
That's what she said to my husband. If she were to kick me out, then she probably thought she would be able to live at this house, which was under my husband's name. However, of course, my husband knew everything that his mother had done to me up until now, and he knew that if we were to live with her, then things would become disastrous. That's why he replied,
What are you saying? The reason why the house burnt down and the reason why my dad died is all your fault. And not only that, have you forgotten everything that you've done to Jessica until now?
And my husband took my side. But then my mother-in-law kept trying to say that none of it was her fault, but it was obvious that everything was her fault. My husband was still angry that she let his father die, and he said that there was no way he was going to let her live with us. My mother-in-law was crying and screaming, saying that she no longer had a house and didn't know how she was going to live. She was throwing a tantrum, but there was actually one more thing that she had messed up. As it turns out, my mother-in-law was saying that every year the insurance was too expensive, and she hadn't paid the insurance that year. Actually, she had received the money from her husband to pay the insurance, but she said it was stupid and that even though they had never had a fire before, that you should be paying hundreds every year for insurance, and she thought it wasn't necessary and hadn't renewed the insurance. My father-in-law knew that his wife often left the fire and oil unattended, and one time she'd even left the fire on and there was smoke coming out of the pan. He even warned her in front of us, but my mother-in-law said that there was no way there was ever going to be a fire. So in the end, she kept it a secret from her husband that she hadn't renewed the insurance, and instead, we discovered that she had gone on vacation with her friend for 2 nights. So of course, there wasn't going to be any money she would receive from the insurance. That's why it seems that my mother-in-law thought everything would be fine if she just moved in with us. Just as she had said earlier, we had just built our dream home half a year ago, and it was a brand new. Maybe she thought she would be able to brag to her friends about living there too. But since my husband and I both denied letting her live with us, and she had nowhere left to live, immediately after the fire, her friends were sympathetic and decided to let her stay at their houses. But then, when they found out that she had used the fire insurance money and used that to go on vacation, everybody said that she did this to herself and distanced themselves from her. On top of that, as for my father-in-law's life insurance, he had spent a lot of money in order to secure a good plan, just in case anything were to happen to him. But it turned out that she also hadn't paid the insurance money either, and with the money that she had left over, she was buying whatever she wanted and going to fancy restaurants with her friends for lunches. There was no way to put it. Besides, she got herself in this situation. After her husband caught on fire, she didn't receive any money whatsoever, and on top of that, her husband had died, so she tried to plead with us.
Hey, come on. Are you going to throw your own parent away? You have a house and it's your job to look after me.
Day after day, she was showing up at our house, but my husband replied,
It's amazing that you can say that after you're the one that killed my dad because of your own carelessness. Don't come near me ever again. I'm cutting off all ties with you so you can go and take responsibility for your own life.
And he kicked her out at the front door. I was worried about what was going to happen if my husband said he felt sorry and that he was going to let her live with us. So I was relieved from the bottom of my heart by his reaction. After that, apparently my mother-in-law somehow moved into an apartment, but when the relatives found out the truth that her carelessness got my father-in-law killed, they were all furious and stormed her apartment. She ended up being chased out of that apartment, and I heard that she's stuck living in the park these days. According to the rumors, she's going through the trash cans, scavenging for food every day. Her clothes have gone ragged and she looks terrible. But I don't have any bit of sympathy for her. She injured me multiple times on purpose, and because of her carelessness, she got my father-in-law killed. And I hope she receives the karma for that for the rest of her life. I live with my husband Gavin and his mother Pat. I'm 25 and I've been working full-time in retail since I was single. I take care of the household because Gavin doesn't have a stable job. While we were dating, he had a full-time job, but when we got married and moved into his parents' house, he quit his job abruptly. My parents-in-law still had the mortgage, and 80% of the monthly payment became my share of responsibility. Since my income was decent, Gavin thought I could support him and Pat. I wasn't happy about it, of course, but I'm still with him after 2 years. My parents moved to the countryside recently to realize their lifelong dream of a sustainable lifestyle, and I didn't want them to worry about me. So I thought I would hang on until I couldn't. Pat was a typical couch potato. She didn't like housework or cooking, so I've been doing the housework and cooking after work. Gavin would hang out at home mostly, and sometimes got an odd job here and there. They lived pretty much freely. My father-in-law, Danny, has been away from home for his work for more than 10 years. He only comes home on his long vacation. This marriage has been nothing but stressful for me. It was a busy week at work, and I had to work overtime for several days in a row. When I came home, Pat was obviously in a bad mood. I said, "Sorry I'm late." Pat said,
You come home late all day this week. What are you doing every day? Go make dinner now.
Then Gavin,
I'm too hungry to move. Bring me a beer now.
I hadn't even sat down for 5 minutes before they used me like this. I didn't argue and started cooking. Then Pat rushed me.
Chop, chop, we're starving. You're too clumsy.
She had to keep saying this. She would complain about small things, but when she was hungry, she was nasty. I was so tired after work and I couldn't take it anymore. And without thinking, I said,
Why don't you make dinner then?
That made her mad and she yelled back at me.
How dare you talk to me like that? If you talk back to me next, I will throw you out of the house.
Since then, she started to harass me. When I come home every day, she would say,
Here comes our maid,
and pushed me cleaning, laundry, and making dinner, one after another. I'm already tired from work, but with these loads of housework, I could finally go to bed after midnight. Seeing me tired all the time, Gavin said,
If you're that tired from a little housework, you're not qualified to be a good wife.
Why can't you help a little? But he wouldn't listen, of course. As my patience ran out, I started thinking about divorce. One day when I got home, they handed me some catalogs with a smile.
We're gonna renovate the house!
This surprised me because there was no way we could afford that. How did they expect us to pay for it? To answer my question, Pat said,
Please take care of the home equity payment.
As if there was an agreement already. I was like, Huh? Gavin said,
It's your job to devote yourself to your husband and his family as a wife. If you don't like it, you can leave here.
We are barely making ends meet. It's impossible to renovate a house unless you start working.
I decided to live off your income for the rest of my life. Your parents are barely self-sufficient in the countryside. Don't forget you have no place to go back to. Take out the home equity loan and just support us.
What the heck? At that moment, I realized divorce was inevitable. I didn't know he was this low. How did I misjudge this man? Once I decided, I came up with an idea. They were afraid of Danny. It was time for me to have a talk with him. He was the only one in the house who's decent and had common sense, and he hated lies and manipulation. I thought I'd tell him about the renovation and divorce. I was nervous, but called him. He said he'd come to the city on business in the following week. I added if we could meet outside the house. Then he seemed to get what I meant.
Sure, I'll call you as soon as my work is done.
We arranged to meet at the cafe a short distance from the house. He arrived a little earlier, looking concerned, and said,
Well, I don't get a call from you often. Something happen at home?
So I told him everything, from the renovation of the house and the home equity loan, what they've been telling and making me daily, to the fact that I've been paying 80% of the mortgage. As he was listening to my story quietly, he looked anxious and angry. After I told him everything, I said I wanted to divorce.
I've been sending her the mortgage money every month. She must be spending it for herself. I support your divorce. I had no idea they were treating you this way behind my back.
And he apologized to me. I was surprised to hear that he's been sending Pat the mortgage money all this time because she said,
When a man lives alone, it costs, and he can't pay for two places.
She told me she hadn't received enough household expenses either.
Regarding the renovation, you can leave it up to me, but it would be helpful if you could pretend you'd take out the loan. In a few weeks, you can tell them that you signed the contract for the renovation. After that, you can leave the house anytime.
He seemed to have a plan, and I agreed to go along with it. 2 weeks later, I told Gavin and Pat that I had signed the contract for the renovation, as Danny suggested. Now I only had to get ready for my divorce. When I started packing, Pat came up to me and said,
Even though you will be paying for the renovation, the house still belongs to us. Don't get the idea it's partially yours.
Gavin grinned. I came up to him and showed him the divorce papers. I'm filing for divorce.
You'll be paying for the renovation even though you don't live in the house because you signed the contract.
He snickered. I said, whatever, and left the house. I had some savings from my single years and signed an apartment with no problem, and my new life started. I became a different person and stress-free without their harassment. I called Danny and told him the updates. Then he told me this. When he talked to the construction company, they found out the renovation couldn't be done structurally. He understood and still ordered, knowing the house won't last for long. Not knowing anything about it, Pat called me a month later.
The loan hasn't been paid yet. What's going on?
So I said, the loan is in your husband Danny's name. She didn't say anything, but just hung up the phone. Later, Danny divorced Pat, and Pat and Gavin took over the loan. He already had a place to live, so he gave the house to them, and they fell apart. When the renovation was done, they still had a long way to go to pay back. Pat's Social Security benefit didn't support both of them, so Gavin took a couple of part-time jobs. Within 6 months, the house began to tilt and became unlivable. They had to move to a cheap apartment, but the expensive loan remained to be paid. Since Pat never supported herself but relied on Danny's income, she never lived a poor lifestyle and became mentally unstable. Well, she asked for it. I, on the other hand, became free and happy. Every day is like a gift to me, and I feel amazing. A year after the divorce, I met someone new, and I am happier than I could ever have imagined. The fact that I don't have to see the two ever again is like the greatest gift to me.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.